Travel Growth Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Travel Growth Podcast. I'm Tom McLaughlin, founder of SEO Travel, and this is where I speak to successful travel business leaders and dig into the successes, challenges, and learnings from their experiences over the years, so you, the listener, can take away actionable advice to enhance your own businesses and maybe even lives too. My guest today is Nick Pulley. Nick is the founder of Selective Asia, a specialist travel operator who crafts unique experiential journeys across Asia with a focus on immersive experiences and travelling responsibly. I met Nick last year when he reached out to me after we announced our 100% initiative, and he wanted to find out more about the thinking behind it. Subsequently, we've had lots of discussions, and I've learned lots from him about his approach to business and travel, which I'm really excited to share with you today. We discussed how Nick got into travel and immediately had a desire to run his own business, how he defines success, and also what it means to be an entrepreneur. But the main topic we get into is something we both have in common, which is moving our businesses to being self-managed organisations and the benefits that that can bring. We've both been working on that over the last year, and the conversation highlights lots of actionable things that Nick's done that I think are super interesting and might well prompt you to delve deeper into the topic for your own business or the business that you work in. It really is a super interesting topic, and yeah, from a personal perspective, I've got a huge amount from it, so I'm sure you'll enjoy. This is a really inspiring episode. There's lots of meaty suggestions in there, and I really hope you enjoy it. So here's me and Nick Pulley. Nick, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tom.
Thanks for coming on. We've got to know each other a bit over the last 6 months or so, and yeah, kind of crossed paths with various things that we're both doing with our businesses. So I'm really excited to talk to you in a bit more depth and find out more about that. And I'm sure there's going to be loads of fun stuff that we can share with the audience that they'll.
Absolutely, likewise. I hope you brought your extra tape because, as I recall, our conversation seems to go down some pretty deep tangents.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I'm sure we won't struggle to fill the time. I thought we could go back and start right at the beginning, and you tell me about your education, like what you were doing there, and kind of how that led into doing what you're doing now.
Sure. So I was very fortunate. I got a sort of a partial scholarship to a public school just north of London due to my my rugby ability, or my extreme size, should we say, so had a really wonderful upbringing, very sort of sports orientated, and then unfortunately at the time, I just as I hit 18, I got a reasonably severe head injury, which meant that I wasn't going to be able to play rugby anymore. So my plans very dramatically changed, and I had been traveling a little bit prior to that, touring with various sides, and so all of that sort of came to a halt. And at 18, I sort of took the decision to take a year out, take stock, and sort of reassess where I would go from there. The idea of going to sports college and then going on to play professional rugby was no longer on the table. So took a year out, had the time of my life. Short visit to Australia and New Zealand, but actually the bulk of it was spent, trying on various tie-dye items, growing my hair out, and generally enjoying the Thai and Indonesian way of life, and just had an absolute blast. I got a real taste for Asia and travel in general. Then I did go on to college and studied geography and business, which obviously has sort of proved to be the right pick as things transpired. But I also continued to travel an awful lot then. I think it's fair to say that my parents, particularly my dad, was growing increasingly concerned that these trips that were just getting longer and longer and longer were never actually going to come to an end, and a job wasn't ever going to get spoken about. He eventually got his way, and I started working at an independent travel business called Bridge the World, where I sort of cut my teeth in travel, as it were. And absolutely loved it. I mean, just travel was my thing. Just enjoyed talking about it. As my first manager called me, he said, "We'll just stick Nick in the." He said about me rather. He said, "We'll stick Nick in the map room. He'll be like a pig in shit." I just loved the logistics of it all. I loved the planning of itineraries, and sort of went from there. And it was a really interesting time because the internet had just started. I mean, to put things in perspective, this must have been 92, 93. And certainly in the first couple of years working in travel, all our inquiries came by fax, and we didn't have email addresses. I remember being shown Hotmail before going to Peru by the tech guy at Bridge the World, and was just absolutely blown away that I could log into this thing from somewhere and email other people. No one else had it, but it didn't matter. I could do it. But it really did fire off an interest in the technical side of things as well. And I quite quickly left there and went about setting up my own online travel business. And don't for a second start to sort of get a visual of lastminute.com scale of travel business. It was not. But prior to that, actually, one interesting thing that had happened was, having left the first travel business, having left Bridge the World, I actually got a job working in Russia for a short while. I was working for an exhibition company, and we were putting on a travel show in Russia. And I was taken out there to sort of inspect the premises and to meet a lot of the key players and so on. And it was a real eye opener. And I've since been to Russia a number of times, gone on the Trans-Siberian Express, and it really sort of installed an interest in that part of the world for me as well while I was there. Well, as we were going over there, we were all given £9,999, which was strapped to our body in various places because you weren't allowed to take more than £10,000 in. I was met at the airport by a guy with a briefcase actually handcuffed to his wrist, and all those monies were put into the briefcase. And then, unfortunately, while I was there, our director of operations was actually assassinated while I was there. So it really brought into perspective the difference in I don't know what the correct term would be, but it was a real eye opener, and obviously not in a great way. Kind of interesting to a 21-year-old idiot like me, but at the same time, obviously very unfortunate.
Yeah, crazy. So what? And did you? What was it? That was travel exhibitions.
Yep.
Was it in Russia?
That's right. Yeah. So it was exhibiting to it was predominantly tourist boards exhibiting across to Russian clients.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me. So then, did you move on pretty sharpish from that? I imagine that kind of experience. Yeah.
And I think I left the job the next week.
Yeah.
It wasn't entirely my choice, actually, as I remember. I wasn't doing particularly well there, so I quickly folded back into the travel industry proper, and joined an old colleague of mine who had set up his own travel business, and then we went about setting up our own internet-based travel business, roundtheworldflights.com. Very Ron Seal, does exactly what it says on the tin, and we absolutely smashed it with it. Actually, it was fantastic. As I say, it was tiny budget. We actually sold after a year or so, and in hindsight, I should have just kept the domain name. I probably sold the domain name now for more than I sold the company at the time. But it was a really fun time. It was a real learning curve, and we were the first round the world flight business on the internet, and I think we had projections for year one of something like £500,000 turnover, and we topped over 2 million in that first year. And I learned a lot about the processes. I learned a lot about the websites were very basic in those days, from databases through to your area of expertise, SEO, and so on. And actually, comparatively to today, it was a lot easier to climb the heights. Just a good domain name like that on its own guaranteed us number one spot for those early years, and also just the sort of the very simple things that you could do on pages to bring in suitable traffic and so on made life quite easy. And obviously, as time went by, businesses like yours became very essential because it's a world of complexity.
Yeah. And so you sold that quite quickly. What happened? Why did that happen?
I was loving it, but I'd had this idea for something a little bit more upmarket. I really wanted to get back into Asia. Working in round the world tickets, there is next to no margin. I was working with a demographic that I loved working with. They were like-minded backpackers. The conversations were wonderful, but it was very hard. Whilst the turnover of that first business was good, the margins were absolutely terrible. I mean, you would typically make £50 on a round the world ticket, and it is quite a manual job. There's a lot of date changes and so on that need to be taken into consideration. So its real viability was within another business, which is exactly what we did. So I sold it to another travel business. I became director there for a period of time, and then I'd started to develop this idea for what ultimately became Selective Asia. I really liked the notion of bringing backpack it to a slightly more upmarket sector, time poor, but still, fleet of foot and people that wanted to really get under the skin of a country. And in my minimal research, and I stress the minimal research at the time, I was pretty much under the impression that I basically invented this thing, and so went about designing this the way that Selective Asia would work, the way that we would have partners in various countries and so on. And it was only after I really got to the end of the development stage of the country, we were pretty close to launching, that I came across a number of businesses which today are our key competitors, and in fairness, our inspiration as well. Some of the longer standing travel businesses, Audley being the obvious one, they really trod the path for us all. And whilst I think we can all find a very significant point of difference within the sector, and I think at Selective Asia we've achieved that, it's really important to recognise who were the front runners in that, because they sort of carved a niche for us all to sort of follow in the wake of. And it's a really interesting sector to work in. I enjoy it a great deal. I've got a lot of friends, it's competitors, yes, but also friends, and I really like that, particularly over this last year or so. That tightness has been wonderful, and I really hope it's something that we manage to retain as we sort of exit out of this last 20 months.
Yeah. Love it. We'll come on to Selective Asia in a bit more detail in a bit. Before we do, just looking back over some of the kind of bits that you've mentioned there, going back to like the school thing and the rugby thing, that must have been a pretty difficult, like when you feel like you're sort of heading off to be a professional rugby player and then it's all just stopped in its tracks. That must have been a pretty tricky time. Like what did you take from that? Like, was it you sort of said you just surfed into the, like, I'm going around the world, but there must have been a tricky bit in the middle.
Definitely not surf. I did try that in Bali that year, and it's not something I've done again. I'm way too tall for that.
So I was going to say the rugby player physique is not necessarily a surfer's
lump of a second row on a surfboard. That's not something you need to see. It would make a Christmas card, I should think. It was certainly very tough. I've always had an ability to move on reasonably quickly from most things, and that certainly proved the case then. I try not to sort of get too stuck in the negativity of things. I do try and sort of keep a focus on the what next. Now that's something you have to be a little bit careful about, obviously, because you've got to go through the process. There is a mourning process in all these sorts of things, and so certainly there was there. I mean, no better place to sort of get over a setback like that than on the beaches of Koh Phan Ngan and travelling overland across a number of Indonesian islands and so on. So I think I sort of struck out, and I very quickly started to get this idea of where the next chapter might be for me. It was very early professional rugby days then. It's not the same as it was now, and so it wasn't that I sort of felt confident in the sense that I'd be earning the £100,000 salaries that players are today. And there was no guarantee, obviously, of making the cut anyway. I was an England schoolboy player, or was in the squad, and so I was doing very well. But it's a tough game, and injuries happen, and mine came arguably at quite a good time in a sense. If it happened 3 years later, it would have been a lot more problematic. I wouldn't have taken the decisions that I did.
Yeah, and why did you flip to? Well, I say flip. Why did you do business and geography? What was behind that decision? Because it sounds like you decided that before you went travelling.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, the degree I was going to do, and I was playing for Wasps at the time, and they had a connection with what was then West London Institute of Higher Education, which is quite a mouthful and not exactly a sort of top tier college. It's an exceptional sports college. Actually, in my final year, it became Brunel University, which was a little bit fortunate for me. So I did sort of step out with a diploma, which had some merit to it, as it were. But I think if I remember correctly, I was going to be doing sports science and business, and so I just swapped out the sports science for geography going forward. But I still was at a very sports orientated college, which I really enjoyed. There was a lot of Olympians there. The UK bobsleigh team were all studying there, for example. A number of really, really top rugby players, not so much football, but rugby and various other sports, canoes and so on. And a lot of the the tutors there were, absolute top of the game, and so it was a really inspiring place to be because I still have a great love for sport, and so it was, I enjoyed being in that environment.
Yeah, I guess when you're like, it often comes up in the kind of entrepreneur side of things, where I guess if you're competitive and you have the sporting side, those two things are quite similar. Like you need that. Well, like you said, the thing to like put things behind you, just get on with it.
Yeah,
like,
I quite regularly claim that I'm not competitive, but I'm reliably told that I am very. I'll take that. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That you do need to have drive. You do need to have persistence. I always struggle a little bit with the term entrepreneur. In truth, I know a few what I class as entrepreneurs, and these are men and women who just go all in, chuck everything on one thing, and then they'll jump to another thing, and they jump to another thing, and I love it. I think it's really amazing. That isn't me, but I do love founding businesses. I've done it a few times now, and I find it really, really exciting. I find it incredibly energizing, and that's massively important. And certainly one of the key takeaways that I've had from the last however many years it is now, 20, 25 years of doing that, is you've got to do it in an area you love. I've met people along the way who have spotted an opportunity, and probably quite a good opportunity, but it's not in a sector or a sort of to a theme that is actually a passion of theirs. And they've always found it harder going, even if the returns are more immediately rewarding. I mean, people don't tend to go into travel for the money. People go into travel for the love of travel. And I like to work amongst those people. My team at Selective Asia, they're I consider them all close friends, even more so those that have, managed to help us as a company and each other and myself navigate this past 20 months. But they're really inspiring people, and they just love talking about travel. It's a fun environment to be in. And I think, if everyone can sort of focus on that as a sort of a key target in their working life, and I appreciate some of us are luckier than others, or I would also argue you sort of make your own luck to a certain extent, but I think if to keep a close eye on that is really, really important, because it just means, it's not, I don't think everyone would subscribe to you never work a day in your life if you're doing what you love, but it makes it easier at least.
Yeah. I think the word entrepreneur is an interesting one. What you're saying sounds like, you're always saying like there needs to be a bit more element of risk in there, and throwing it to the wall, and it might all come crumbling down.
Absolutely, and then they somehow dust themselves off and go for it again. I find that absolutely inspiring, but I don't know that I've got quite the. I don't think I've got the blood of steel to take that. My nerves would shatter.
No. Well, I mean, for me, it was very much like the slow. Did it alongside work, and only when it was doing well enough that I could I could go and jump to it and carry on.
And why was it for you travel? What was it, just that travel was a sector that you saw great opportunity, or was travel something that you were really interested in?
No, so it started because Claire and I had done a lot of traveling. I actually wanted to be a writer, so I'd started up my own like travel blog magazine-y thing. That was the idea for that originally was that I would use it as a portfolio to get writing jobs, and then I started in SEO and essentially started applying the things that I was learning in SEO to that site, and it started ranking well. And then I picked up relationships with people in travel and things like that, and saw what was working in travel, and it kind of slapped me around the face that I had all this information about the travel sector and the agency I was working at, and all the other agencies I knew were all service to all industries. And I thought, hang on, if I set a thing up here that specializes in travel, I enjoy it, I'll be looking at travel websites all day long, and I'll be able to do a better job.
Better than looking at financial industry websites and so on. You can't get that same level of enjoyment from it, can you?
Garden irrigation and sheds and stuff like that, which ironically I'd probably quite like now, but it's at the time it was very much so it felt like a much more interesting day-to-day existence. So and like you say, the more you kind of that was it really. It was just this makes sense, so I'll give it a go and see what happens. But then the more you get into it, the more you realise the people that you work with in travel are great people, particularly the smaller businesses. It's people who just love what they're doing, and it's a lot more rewarding to work with people like that, where that's their end
100%,
goal, rather than a marketing manager at a big business that is just purely delivering the thing they have to deliver chasing about the high level numbers and profit and all that kind of thing, which, listen, obviously they're important things and you've got to have a handle on them, but it's not like the be all and end all of just like get that as big as possible and that's the only thing we're interested in. And having the people who are properly dialed in and kind of enthusiastic about the topic themselves makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of moving on to I guess segueing that into the starting around the world flights. So what kind of gave you the initial urge of like, were you always thinking at some point maybe I'll start my own business, or again was that kind of idea of it just turned up and it was like, this is too obvious not to do? Why did that happen?
I was always thinking that. My dad will sort of tell me that during the, so I guess this would be my very, very early 20s, I'd phone him most weeks with the next idea. And he would, push it back with one simple question, usually around, well, how's that going to make any money? And it'd be like, oh, yeah. No, of course, that won't, will it at all? It's useless. Back to the drawing board. But so I love travel. I know I wanted to stay in travel. I was sort of getting an understanding of what the internet could do. I was speaking to my former colleague who I was now working for in his own travel business, and I really sort of got his mind thinking. He was perhaps more focused on that, that really important part, that how are we going to monetize this? What are we going to sell? I was looking at it more from a directory perspective. We could pull together all these overland operators, for example, and we could create a sort of sales portal of some sort. And it was between the two of us, as I recall, that we sort of steered it round to Round the World Flights. He had bought the domain, so he was obviously sort of thinking perhaps a little bit earlier than I was about some of that flight ticket potential. And we got lucky. We got in with the right sort of site developers who were patient with us and helped us sort of better understand the technicals along the way. And that was a really good schooling for me, because it meant, in the very early days, every database that was being built was a new entity. There was nothing sort of we want to do it a little bit like that, but this is our point of difference. We were like, we've got this idea, we're going to sell around the world tickets. So, to start the business, I loaded in the region of 2,500 round the world flight routes into a database, which was laborious to say the least. And then every time they updated the ticket rules, I had to go back through all of those. And every destination was a different drop down. It was painful. And every time they changed the price, we didn't have that sort of unified approach that you have now, where you can sort of just go in and sort of change the rules on 15 different pages at once and everything else. So, I learned the hard way. But I just found it really, really inspiring. I love being amongst it. And of course, that then sort of got me sort of thinking about how I could move on from round the world flights, what I wanted to do within Asia. And this was a time when everything was brochure based. The tour operator market was very 5-star focused. There wasn't anything for the sort of the mid-market, as I would class it, 2-3 star. And it just seemed like an absolute sitter to me. I knew Asia particularly well and really wanted to be involved in working with Asia, had aspirations maybe to live out there as well. Never did that, in fact, but I get to travel there as often as I do, or have in the past anyway. So that sort of scratched that itch for me. And so I really approached Selective Asia as an internet first business, whereas every other tour operator wasn't there. Now most are. That's normal now. And I was a part of that first sort of band of companies that came onto the scene. And because it was a one-man band, it was very much a bedroom startup. The innocence of starting these business, I didn't set out to think I want to employ 30 people. I want to have a turnover of this. I thought I want to just do this and, I'll be happy. And so I very much designed the processes within the website around giving clients or visitors to the website everything they needed on the website. So by the time they actually picked up the phone or dropped me an email, they had actually done a lot of the educating of themselves as opposed to needing to be doing a lot of that. So that meant following the group tour approach to a certain extent, which was very much sort of having various itineraries on the website. Again, very normal today, absolutely unheard of then. No one was doing it. And what I also did was break every trip into 4 different prices, so 4 different categories of hotel, and also different number of people traveling. So people could quite literally go, I want that one. And there's and we'll go in that standard of hotel. And that really streamlined things. And when I started Selective Asia about 2 or 3 years into it was when the financial crisis first hit. And so that was obviously a very, I remember being absolutely terrified. I think by that point, we were a team of 3 or 4. And, I was absolutely terrified by what the impact of that would be. And as it turned out, it couldn't have gone better for us, because we were one of the few companies that were sort of offering this type of trip to a lower price range. And so you had a lot of people who previously were 5-star all the way, 6-star all the way, were then coming to us and saying, we'll take mixture of 3 and 4-star, and saving several £1,000s per person per trip. And so that was very fortunate. That's just, there's no skill in that. That was good timing. But what we had also really done is really focus on the experience. These trips weren't about the hotels as much. I mean, we very carefully picked the hotels we used, and we still do to this day. It's a massive part of what we do. But actually, I'm much more focused, as is everyone within the business, on the day-to-day, what you're actually doing, what you're getting to see, how you're seeing it as well is so important. Because if you just follow the trail, you're in a queue. And we don't want that for our clients. We want to sort of get them behind the scenes a little bit. And so we work very hard at that. And then if they've got a great hotel at the end of the day, all the better. But we're also taking them to places where there isn't a great hotel at the end of the day, but also they're prepared for that. We manage expectations. Travel's a huge part of travel is managing expectations, because you can say one thing and people are hearing something completely different. So really reinforcing, you've got 2 nights there. And when I say it's basic, I mean basic. I mean, I don't know if you've ever saw Michael Palin's Himalaya series. That was a series 25 years ago that it really inspired me. It was very influential for me. Yeah. And I remember him going to the Rongbuk Monastery in Tibet at the foot of Mount Everest. And I've since been there. And I'm delighted to say it hasn't changed from when he was there. But, you're at 5,500 meters above sea level, and there are holes in the wall that they've just sort of stuffed loo roll into, and you're sleeping under really bad Chinese made electric blankets, which are all slightly damp anyway, and they've got electricity coming into them. It's terrifying, really. You don't sleep well, but you wake up to the most unbelievable view. You're looking straight up the valley at Everest. And so, you need to prepare clients for that sort of hotel, because they were staying in a 5-star rack in Lhasa or Beijing or wherever it was previously. But I think a lot of clients really like that. They like mixing the rough with the smooth. You just need to make sure you've got them suitably prepared for how rough is, and they're not all that rough.
Yeah, but like you say, it's worth it. If they realise that by going to that place, that's the best experience you can have, and that's the best hotel you can have to have that experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Suddenly, that's like you say, it's a no-brainer as long as the money's come in. Last one on the round the world flights side of things. So you said you sold it back to the guy who started
sold it within the same company that I had joined. Yeah, it was a little bit. So basically, I had joined a company called Global Village, great company, again, independent travel business. Simon was one of the directors, owners of that business. We together started Round the World Flights. He had several partners, and then we sold Round the World Flights into Global Village, and I became one of the directors and a small shareholder in Global Village as part of that deal.
Okay. So what would you say were like the key lessons that you took from that and then into Selective Asia? Because you started Selective Asia on your own, not with the co-founder.
Correct, yeah.
Yes.
I learned a huge amount from that. I learned a huge amount about not how to do things as we all do typically in these sorts of things. We sold way too quickly. We sold way too cheaply in reality. We didn't explore other avenues of solution, whether the business could really be on its own, whether we could bring in the other attributes of the business rather than sell it to a business that already has those other attributes. So we sort of rushed that a little bit. I learned a lot about the sort of the overriding governance of business. I learned that I was a terrible manager of people. I hope that's something I've improved since. I didn't do a very good job then, and I put my hands up to that. And I learned a lot about the tech side of things. I'm a long way from understanding, the deeper side of development and tech, but I sort of understand the surface of it, and that's really, really important I think in almost any business these days. I mean, we're all in one way or another plugging into the internet, and it's good to have a sort of a grounding of that, because you can waste an awful lot of time trying to break the mold, trying to do things slightly differently from others, and that's something that I've done many times over the years, and it seems like a good idea at the time. It rarely works out to be the right thing. So to simplify things, and I think from that it gave me the confidence to go forward and have a go at this by myself. And having confidence is a huge part of it, because not everyone has, in fact, far from everyone has the appetite to sort of put everything that they have on the line to go and start a business. And I had done that the first time round, but in the comfort of doing it with others. And then I was doing that again on my own. And so I think Selective Asia was a better launch from the experiences that I'd had of doing that in the company of a couple of other business owners.
Yeah. So, and then tell us a little bit more about just what that process looked like, that initial setup. How did that look? What did you do? What were the first steps to get
sort of gone full
on
circle, because here I am in my spare room in my house now, running Selective Asia, and that's how it started, but in a different house back in Brixton. Yeah, I was working part-time at Global Village still, and work part-time on Selective Asia. And anyone I ever speak to who's thinking about starting a business, that's my first bit of advice every time. Don't leave some regular income until you absolutely have to, or you've got the confidence of it. It always takes longer than you think it's going to take, and you will make bad decisions if you become so financially desperate to get a quick buck out of things. You won't do things the right way. You'll take shortcuts, or you just make bad calls. So that certainly is something. I can't remember how long I did that for, but I'm guessing it was certainly well north of 6 months. It might have even been the best part of a year. So I was sort of working in both those businesses simultaneously. I pulled on every favour, friend, etc. that I could do. People. I had a great friend, Claire, who was a copywriter, so she was a huge help for me. I had friends who were my design partner for many years. He was a good friend, and he and his business sort of really helped out in the early days as well. And I sort of took it pretty slowly. I got myself out to Asia pretty quickly with a photographer, another friend of mine, and we shot the most incredible stock imagery, which we still use to this day, and it's really real. He and my designer had sort of got their heads together, and we were all pretty bored of forgive me, but your Thomas Cook-esque type imagery of perfect turquoise waters, beautiful couple with a glass of champagne in their hand. That wasn't what we wanted to be about. What we wanted to be about was we wanted to see people in situ seeing what we were seeing. So the photographer Simon Clark, he spent 5 weeks sneaking up behind people who were taking photos of the Angkor temples or something like that with this huge lens and getting in there. But we really got in amongst it, and we took time. We were very respectful, obviously, of the people we're taking photos of, getting into conversations with them. The amount of people that just wanted to be involved in that, and then sort of said, yeah, by all means, just tag along with us for the next hour or so. And that was really good fun. And it meant I was making a lot of contacts out there along the way as well, not just the tourists, but I was spending a lot of time talking to businesses. And it was a really exciting time because, as I said earlier, the travel sector was a bit formulaic, frankly. It just didn't have the same level of flexibility and innovation that I think it's got today. And so that was just a really great time to be out there, and I really enjoyed the whole experience of boots on the ground, being amongst it. There I was in my flip-flops with a laptop, a huge laptop bag on my back, zooming around the countryside on a moped. It was just a really exciting time.
Yeah, the imagery thing, that's a great kind of tip for people, because I think even now, with all the stock photography that's out there and all the resources, it's still a chief obstacle for people that we work with, and websites and websites.
I couldn't agree more, and it's something you have to keep investing in. For the last 10 years or so, a very close friend of mine, Richard Hanson, he's a photographer. We would typically travel once a year together, maybe once every other year, and the stock that he's producing for us is just amazing as well. It just sets you apart. Nothing sells travel, and I'm sure other things like imagery. You can write all you want, no one's reading it half the time, but they're looking at the images, and the images is what it creates the sort of the stickiness, brings them into your world. And we're certainly starting to develop approaches now, which mean we're using that imagery much more during the consultation process with clients as well, because it's what they want to see. They want to get a sense of what they're going to be amongst, and you and you just, it can't be too polished. I guess if you're selling the Caribbean or something like that, that really is what it looks like, but the rest of the world doesn't. There is very unfortunately huge amounts of debris and plastic on beaches. There is battered mopeds in the streets. The street food is delicious, but it doesn't necessarily always look that way to the eye.
It's not an Instagram plate.
That's what we want to show people, because that means that they're buying into us for the right reasons, as opposed to this sort of slightly manufactured image of ourselves and the destinations we work in.
Yeah, and like you throw videography into that now as well, as an additional thing, which is so important, whether it's for website material or promotional stuff.
We just need smell next now, don't we? Smell-o-vision can't come soon enough for travel, because when you're looking at a moving still of of someone cooking a bowl of pho on the streets of Vietnam or something like that, you just desperately want to get the waft of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned kind of when you were starting, having the research, doing the research, and then almost like retrospectively discovering that this thing already existed with people like Audley. What was the research you were doing? Like, how did you go about forming a plan and how it was all going to web together? And then at what point did you go like, oh
like that? Yeah. I really came at it I think, to put it into context, this will sort of give you an example. I think it was only after about 6 months of being open that I came to terms with the fact that the hotels were really important to people, like the actual hotel as opposed to the standard hotel. So for the first 6 months, there wasn't a single hotel page on the website. And then every time someone did inquire, their first question was, where am I staying? And I sort of quickly thought, okay, I've left a hole here. I need to go back and actually do all the hotel inspections. So I then went on a very, very, really hard trip through 4 countries where I forget the count now, but it was north of 1,000 hotels that I saw in 3.5 weeks. It was brutal. Wow. I was broken by the end, but I learned a lot from it. And you learn not to take hotels at face value on their websites, and in doing so, you learn how not to be presenting hotels on your own website. And it's a really important thing. So I had very much come at it from the grassroots level. What I was really focusing on was, I'd been to Laos as a backpacker. These were the things I enjoyed. How could we make that a little less rough around the edges? How could we bring in the convenience? How could we facilitate comfort rather than, stay in a backpacker lodge, take a bus to get there and so on? Where do I get a vehicle from to get clients there who are a bit better heeled? And where would they stay nearby? So I was sort of focusing on those sorts of things. So really, which was really great. That was a huge benefit, because otherwise I think what I would have probably done is just sort of, that sort of, I just want to be another one of that company or that company, that company. So it meant that I was doing things the right way. I was building it up appropriately, but I was also the whole time, even with regards to the imagery, like literally we had a call list for imagery, and I knew there was going to be a page about staying in touch, for example. And so we were always looking for quirky local post restaurants or post offices around Asia. And we came back with some amazing stock, which sort of gave the website a bit of cheek, a bit of relevance, really, really clever. It's because we had the imagery for these pages as we went around, as well as this incredible stock image for other things. And we've continued to do this, to do that sort of same approach to this day. And I think it was when I was finally choosing who my partners were going to be in various countries, and that was a steep learning curve, really steep learning curve. So I spent a lot of time in offices in Bangkok and Saigon and so on. I remember clearly I had some friends who lived in Bangkok who I'd met on another trip once. They were much older than me. And in fact, the guy was he was setting up a bank for GE in Bangkok, so he was a very senior guy, and he'd said to me, come and stay with us in Bangkok when you're over, which I did, and he'd given me his driver and his car for the day to go to these various meetings. And I'd been in this one DMC office, and they had very much dismissed me out of there. Totally understandable. I was absolutely nobody, and I'd sort of gone in there stamping my feet a little bit about the standards that I expected, etc., etc. And they'd sort of brushed me out. And I went down in the lift with this guy, which was a little bit awkward anyway, because it had been reasonably abrupt ending to the meeting. And as I stepped out of the lift, my driver was waiting there with the door to a 7 Series BMW open in his arm, and this guy desperately tried to drag me back in. He thought that he'd sort of really missed an opportunity. He hadn't. So that sort of stuff. Again, you learn the wrong way to do things, and you need to be realistic about how much you can achieve at each stage. You're not going to crack the whole nut right off the bat, and I think that's really important. You've probably found that along the way with your own business. We've got big eyes. People that start businesses typically have got big eyes, and we want to do everything yesterday, and you just can't. You've got to slow down, and because it becomes a huge distraction.
Yeah, I mean the thing, for me, for other people that I've spoke to on the podcast, like it comes up all the time. The take little steps, like move yourself in the right direction, get things moving. Like you were saying, even just the start it alongside work, so you don't have to take some giant leap and hope for the best. Like that just consistently comes up over and over again, and it's very much one of my guiding principles is keep things getting slightly better all the time, and don't worry about that. If you're doing a giant thing, it's probably not the right thing to do.
Correct.
There's probably another
we both work with John, and no doubt we'll get into more on John later on, but that idea of identifying and communicating what you plan to ship this week or ship this month, but also what you plan to ship in the next 6 months. So you've got that long-term vision, but you're not getting distracted by it now. You just keep it on the periphery, and you just that small chunking, and you just sort of keep tucking away at it. And it's a hard thing to do because we're all distracted the whole time by what other businesses are doing, what other people are doing, and we don't want to get left behind. But actually, that distraction is not a positive thing.
Yeah, agree. Before we move into the work we've both done with John, just give us a quick picture of what the business looked like with the team and things before COVID. So just a brief kind of précis of that before we move into the changes.
So January 2020, we were 32 people, I think it was, based in Brighton, and really, really inspiring team. We were in 19 or 20 countries, I think I'm right in saying. We had been on a bit of a rally with adding new destinations, and over the course of the previous 4 years we had added another 7 destinations, and we had really sort of put some focus into that, and we had also poured some investment into it. We brought enough people in to ensure that we did that correctly. We typically always launched one destination per year, and that was 1 or 2 people's full-time role to a certain extent, or the equivalent of, let's say, because if we're going to be an Asia specialist and we're going to launch a new destination, we need to be a specialist in destination X as well, and it takes time to do that. And you're not sending clients out there as guinea pigs. You're the guinea pigs. You've got to go and work out how to do it, how not to do it, and so on. So we had sort of really scaled up. Timing was terrible, unfortunately. So whereas first financial crash timing was great, second time, particularly Brexit, timing was terrible, and so we had really, we'd hit it. We were still sort of head above water, but the waterline was getting close, and so we were turning very, very small profits, and we were sort of, we'd very much plateaued. And we've always had the most incredible team spirit, and the values within the business are really strong. I think prior to 2019, if I remember correctly, 2 people ever had left the business. And so, that in itself tells you, but that had sort of become a problem as well in a way. People didn't feel that they could leave. Which you make a rod for your own back. I mean, I love the fact that people were staying, but at the same time, if people weren't happy, they should be moving on. But I think people were very happy in general. But we certainly had some problems that were not getting addressed, and a lot of that was around this very sort of slowing growth and this lack of opportunity within the business. And again, it's something that lots of businesses that size suffer from. So I was myself personally struggling a little bit by that point. I didn't feel I had the answers like I used to. Didn't feel like I had the touch of the business in the same way. I had very much started to do a much more administratively heavy role. You start a business because you want to be creating this incredible travel. And actually, typically what happens, and this is something you and I have spoken about before, typically what happens is you become a manager, and then you become or you're a managing director, and actually so much of your life is focused on the administration and helping other people, managing other people, and sort of just steering the general direction of the business, not really doing the stuff that you're good at. And that hopefully you're good at lots of things, but the area that you really want to be working in. And so that's sort of how it felt come end of 2019, early 2020. Disaster struck, obviously, on a global level, but actually in very early 2020, it struck on an Asian level. And so we saw January, February, March are typically our high sale months. That's peak season for sales. It's also just coincidentally peak season for departures as well. But we, by the end of January, were in no doubt that things were going to take a huge tumbling. We didn't have the foresight to see that that globally we were going to go into lockdowns that we went into and so on, but Asia itself was definitely going to. There was no doubt about that. So 12th of March was the day that Vietnam's borders shut, and then one by one, like literally every day, another border shut after that. But in January, sales of Asia had absolutely tanked. And so as we went into February, we were already coming to terms with the fact for the very first time that we were going to need to be making redundancies. There was clearly going to be a massive stagnation of sales in Asia. For how long we didn't know, but we knew that we had to act very quickly. So that was a really challenging time. By the time we got to March, it was being confirmed around the world, and I think we all started to come to terms by sort of April, May, that these lockdowns were going to be coming into effect everywhere, or they actually in fact had all come into effect. But by the end of March, I think the whole of Asia was zipped up. You couldn't get into any destinations. And here we are where are we, the 10th of October or the 19th of October, and we're just about to have our first departure in 21 months this Thursday. So wow. That's the chalk and cheese of Selective Asia, and we're a much smaller team, but we're a very different team, and it's this is how we've met. This is where our conversations have come from, and much as I miss the colleagues that have left, and what they brought to the businesses, and also just their friendship. I love the business that I'm part of now because it's just completely transformed, and I'm so excited about what we'll do as a business going forward.
Yeah, you'll be due a beer on Thursday then when that flight goes out. So like you said, we keep referring to John. We're talking about John Barnes, who is a consultant who you worked with initially, and then via our conversations, you then introduced me to him, and we've subsequently worked with him. And I think we'll all agree we're big John fans.
Big John fans,
Tell us, at what stage did you decide, right, this is the thing I'm going to do, and then give us, tell us what happened, what the starting point was, how you got going.
So I referred to March earlier, and these borders sort of closing down. I very quickly identified a small team within the business. This is March 2020. Small team. We were all focused on getting people home very urgently, and we did some pretty wild and wonderful things. We had people driving clients through the night across Sri Lanka to get to the airport before it closed the next day. We were literally kidnapping one client off a train in India because if they had arrived at the station, they would have been put into quarantine. We were bundling people out of Myanmar, getting them off cruise boats and things like that. It was a crazy time. Very focused, very energetic, and really weird. And everyone else was on furlough, so there was only 8 of us sort of left within the business. And really weirdly, I was still in the office with 2 other people. Everyone else had moved from home, so you'll remember that. Everyone will remember that. Just the madness of not only in travel, not only are we dealing with trying to get people, extracting people from countries very, very quickly. We've got a lot of people wanting to know about their future bookings, but we've also just had to move everyone home as well. So it was nuts. But it was kind of, fun's not the right word, but I loved the energy to it all, and it was really inspiring work, and that sort of total change of gear. It's sort of what I've been waiting for years in a way, just something really different to get my teeth into. I think I'm always quite good in a catastrophe, and so they don't get much sort of greater than that in business terms. through all of that, I started to have ideas of what the business could be going forward. And I was quite surprised in myself as to how quickly those things started to form. And I think it was this release, this sort of understanding that there was absolutely no way we were going to be the same business at the end of this. That was very, very clear to me. We were going to have to let people go. There was no option, and it was going to be a significant count. And so I started to sort of just talk about what we could do differently, how we could shape the business going forward. All the things I hated about, the changes, the way we had grown over the years. We'd lost our nimbleness. We didn't have the fleet of foot that we used to have. And a big part of it was just this rather sort of clunky processes and communication. Businesses, they all do the same thing. You build processes on processes on processes, and it just gets slower and slower and slower. And people join the business further down the line. You can sort of almost read it on their face. Like, why do you do things that way? There's a straight line to that, and it's like, oh no, we go that way because that's how we do it. And so I started talking about that quite a lot. And I was just chatting to a very close friend of mine, and she said, "Oh, you need to speak to John." And I was like, "Who's John?" Anyway, spoke to John and had a hour-long conversation with John, and was just buzzing about it, because I was saying, we want to strip the business out. We want to sort of build back up. I want to get people much, much more involved in actually running their own desk, running the business themselves. This is not a one-man job anymore. And I just had all these sort of dreams of the way that we could restructure things. And John just said, "Yeah, that's what I do, but you don't need me. You're saying it all yourself." And I said, "No, I do, because I need it to happen." And I'm just really fortunate to have met John at that time, because he came in very early on and just sort of we're all working remotely, obviously. So he just started sort of working amongst us. And I think what was so important, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this. What was so important to John coming in on a consultancy basis, helping us strip back completely, and bear in mind we're at a time where there is zero business, so it's perfect. It's not ideal in the sense that you haven't got any money coming in, but we come to terms with that. We weren't going to make any money for quite a long time. The hamster wheel had stopped turning. We weren't chasing money each month, chasing sales each month, trying to break even, trying to make a profit. We were looking much more at focusing on how we can redesign the business, how we can build back up. And the way you have to do that is strip right down and then bit by bit build back up. And to do that as a self-organizing entity, which is what we've now become, you need to empower people and you need to help them and coach them and teach them how to take ownership of these things themselves. And that's what John did. And it's so important that it's John that did it, because I wouldn't have had the expertise, not by a long shot, to do it anyway. I had some ideas, but I didn't know how to deliver it. But also, I think having someone from outside the business coming in and teaching you how to do it, rather than your boss saying, "Oh, I now want you to stop thinking of me as boss and start thinking of each of your colleagues and myself as equals," and stuff like that. It's not going to work.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, no, certainly I found having a third party being the person who was explaining this stuff, because I've had it, as I'm sure it's like you're constantly trying to learn stuff yourself and just be one step ahead of the game, and then rarely are you in a place that you can teach those things to other people in as a kind of in-depth and informative way as you would like. Whereas when you have that other person there, they do have that knowledge and expertise. So when questions come up, he's got the answer to them, and he can explain, like, okay, that's a really good question, but here's why that's not the case, or here's why we're doing that particular thing, and everyone gets on board with that. Versus, like you say, again, it's just that if the top down, John said this to me a few times, if the like top down kind of being dictatorial about democracy, like it's like, yeah, I'm telling you all, you have to be democratic.
Yeah, you've got to be democratic, exactly.
because I say so.
Because I'm telling exactly. I mean, it just doesn't work. So it's such an intricate and complex thing. But John, and I'm sure there are others like John, but John makes it so straightforward, and people buy into him very, very early on, because it's a really hard thing to get your head around initially. So stop asking permission. You don't need to be asking permission, and actually sort of looking at each other in across the team. So, I mean, one of the very early things that we did, and I think it's fair to say of all John's clients, we've sort of gone more all in than most, or if not any, because we didn't have any sales to worry about, as it were. We were just handling existing clients and doing that to the best of our ability in some very difficult circumstances. Because of that, John was able to come in. We stripped out all departments, removed all titles, and identified, as in everyone within the business, identified areas of the business that they felt needed improving, that felt needing addressing. So we start working on those. People are putting their hands up for the areas that they want to work in. And it's not me in everything. And one thing I sort of didn't address early on with prior to starting to work with John and prior to the pandemic was there is no question that my participation within the business was clogging up the business. Everything came through me. And that's just how it had always been. We'd started as one person, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. So the final decision always sat with me, and it was so ineffective. And it wasn't good for me either, because it meant that, I'm not always making the best decisions, not by a long shot. And also everything gets stuck with me. There's so much stuff coming over my desk that it just clogs up, and it means that you're not letting the business flow properly. So John coming in and helping people understand a structure that didn't have me as a blocker was really, really important. And what I found really interesting was I totally accept that, prior to the pandemic, I was a very controlling person in the business terms, and I think people would probably say on personal terms, personal way sometimes as well. That was sort of how I felt the business was best run. I now absolutely recognise that isn't the case, and I found it incredibly easy to let go. Really surprisingly so. I enjoyed it. I loved letting go, and that is. There is no alternative. You can't be the business owner and move towards a self-organizing or an adaptive sort of structure and not release. There can't be an underlying objective. Yeah. You can't be sneaky about it. It doesn't work. And I've really loved that. It's great. Sorry for the dog in the background there.
That's all right.
And everyone's loved the empowerment as well, and they've absolutely flourished in it. I mean, I know you've seen the video that John shot with us, but I said at one point how much everyone is buzzing about it, and it's not an exaggeration. Even on tough days, people are buzzing about it. It doesn't mean it comes without its problems, or it doesn't come without its problems. It absolutely does. Nothing's perfect, but we're now 15 people driving a business forward, as opposed to 14 getting a bit frustrated that what they've asked me to take care of isn't getting taken care of quickly enough.
Yeah, I'll link to the stuff in the notes of the show so that they can see the case study and things like that, Nick. So because I think it's well worth watching that to see the impact from not just our perspective and how we're talking about it, but to see your team.
And there wasn't a gun pointing at them from slightly out of camera shot. I promise you, I wasn't even in the room.
Yeah, interesting. I was talking to John about it, and he was saying how one of the team said something on the video that it was clearly one of his favorite bits of it, and he said it was it wasn't a rehearsed thing. It was clear she was you can see it in her eyes that she's having this realization as she's talking. As she's talking on it. It's a great thing to watch. I think the point of that was the reason I took to it so quickly as well, because I was absolutely in the same position as you. I felt like the bottleneck. I felt like I was stopping good things from happening.
Yep.
Control was my thing, and I recognized that I needed to let go of that, but I needed someone to help me to do it in the right way.
I think it's worth you sharing how you did that, because I think that's absolutely brilliant. What?
well, we I guess the way that feeds into us. You got in touch with me after I'd announced the 100% and the profit giving stuff that we started in April. And obviously we kind of had a chat to talk about that, and then you mentioned the stuff with John, and that the penny just dropped immediately for me there. And I thought, I'm going to go and look at this. I read a bit of John's stuff. He had a free course that you could do, so I got into that. And basically, from sending him an email saying, "Hi, John, one day it'd be nice to have a chat if you're free at some point," I probably emailed him 2 days later and said, "No, we need to talk. Are you free tomorrow?
There's some urgency to this. Yeah.
We need to go." So, and then he came on, and we did. We'll come on to some of the specific stuff from your perspective, because there's a lot of crossover in it. But we did a bit of work with him for maybe a month, and one of the things that John said to me early on was, how long have you been away from the business since you started it 10 years ago? What's the longest that you've not been involved in stuff? And yeah, I sort of whimpered like a week maybe to him, and it was like a week where I'm still checking emails and probably still sticking my oar in from time to time. So even him just asking that question kind of, again, and the penny dropped a little bit, and I was like, bloody hell, that's not enough. This thing, that is not the reason. And so he said, how would it feel to not be there for a month? Like what would happen? What would that be like? And yeah, I just sat on it for a bit, and yeah, I think I'd reached that point because again, it come through like all the pandemic stuff. Things were, we were lucky that we could pivot into different areas and sectors and things to offset the travel side of things. But yeah, still it had been super, super difficult. And I'd kind of reached a point of malaise where I was just like, I don't know, I can't keep doing this same thing at this pace and intensity. So I was looking for a change. And yeah, I just thought, that sounds good, Jack. I'd like to do that. What a good idea.
The extremeness of it is absolutely brilliant because, as you say, you have been able to pivot into something else, and therefore the business was keeping going. My escape, as it were, was because there is no sales, and so me just accepting that's actually done what you being away from the business for a month has done. So it's just two different methods. But I think his insight into that is really, really interesting because you do need to trigger a very significant change. You can't drip into it. It's a very, you are definitely turning left now. You're not going that way anymore.
Yeah. And he, we did, obviously it wasn't just kind of, this isn't something I'd recommend to everyone. Just like, walk out your business for a month and see what happens. Like, and it'll all come back and be smelling of roses. Like we'd worked on a lot of stuff over, I'd worked with another coach who was really fantastic before that. And we'd been doing lots of stuff around processes and systems and things. Like you say, I think there's like a point of you need enough processes that people know they have their guidelines, but then you want to stop before they become too entrenched.
Absolutely. I wrote an article for Corporate Rebels, which anyone listening to this, if anyone is out there, Corporate Rebels is a great website. If this sort of area of business interests you, Corporate Rebels is absolutely something to tap into. And I wrote an article for them, and I spoke about the need to do the foundation work. There is a temptation with self-organising and adaptiveness to just sort of see the headlines and, the company that pays everyone X amount, or the company where holiday is unlimited, etc., etc. That's not what it's all about. I mean, you might get to that. You may not feel it's necessary, but it's about the foundation work. It's about ripping out old hierarchy, old departmental stuff. And you can't necessarily, not every business is suited to going the whole hog, some more than others, and not all people are either. Some people won't. I know from speaking with John, he works with several businesses where there are people there that don't buy into it. Some people do and some people don't. You've got to be really respectful of that because it isn't necessarily for everyone. I think the desperate situation we found ourselves in gave everyone within Selective Asia reason to go all in. And that included myself. And but when you go all in, you build up from the bottom. You don't sort of come in halfway up and leave bad old foundations in there, because if you do, it won't work.
Yeah. To just, I guess, to backtrack and just give people the sort of headline. When I first started talking about this, I was kind of talking about like agile working and talking about that. And I guess the more I've gone into it, the more I feel like that doesn't necessarily tell the full story. I feel like that people think of like, scrums and, team masters and all these kind of things. And I feel like that's part of it, but then there's it's like a bigger umbrella of like mentality in the business and things like that.
Agility's sort of almost a behavior within the business, I think, as I understand agility, and I'm not positive that I do understand it fully, but it's sort of part of your processes. But holacracy is a little bit closer perhaps to the where we've steered to, but I would say we have a lot less set structure than
Yeah.
holacracy, I think, demands, as I understand it. Again,
Yeah.
adaptiveness is what we typically call it, but I've been pulled up on that by one of my copywriters, Susie, who said, look, I know you're loving talking about this. No one has the first idea what you're talking about. Try
Yeah.
self-organizing. It's like, yeah, no, that sort of does make sense.
Yeah, no. Well, I was gonna. That's literally one of the things I've written down. Is like, what do we call it? Like, what is it? Adaptive is the word that I've then started steering to. But I think you're right. Like the two things that come up when we're discussing this often is like self-organizing and self-managed.
Yep.
So essentially, you're creating a team where there is no hierarchy, where there is no boss that things go to get signed off. But within your pockets, within the team, the sign-off kind of happens at a peer-to-peer level. So people come up with
that's
ideas.
exactly it. You get rid of the stodgy middle as well. So you get rid of the blockage at the top of the business, in our case, me, and you get rid of the sort of the stodgy middle of, supervisory, managerial, call it what you will. Previously, you've sort of not understood how business can work without that. And the only way that it does work is that if everyone is fully empowered and fully understands the flexibility of their roles. So to give you an example, a really easy one, if you want to take a day's holiday, you look at who else is out that day, and you either just take a day's holiday and mark yourself up for it, or if there's already one person out or two people or whatever that number is that sort of makes it a bit should I, shouldn't I, you just ask two colleagues, what do you think? And it doesn't need to be a manager, you need to ask a colleague that might be directly affected by you taking that day out. But for that to work, those colleagues need to be able to say no. They need to feel sort of authorized, if you like, or the ability to say no, because we'll all typically say yes to colleagues. We like helping each other out, but if you can see that that's going to be to the detriment of the business, you got to say no back. So there's little intricacies to it, but you don't need a holiday monitor, as Lucy, my colleague who sort of HR would say. I said, I don't need to be a holiday monitor anymore. And of course she's absolutely right. But also we've designed some much bigger examples of that. So we have, if you want to update or introduce a new policy, major policy of the business, then we've got a structure for you, for anyone within the business to propose it. They then choose a team of 3 to work with on it, and those 3 need to really ask the tough questions, as it were, about, well, no, that isn't, and we've got various things. Is it in the interest of the clients? Is it in interest of the business? Is it in the interest of us? And if you can say yes to those 3 things, then it's a yes, that policy stands. And very rarely should it require me coming in and going, no, actually, I'm going to overrule that for some reason. But we sort of leave that door open just in case, as it were, for the trial period. And those sorts of structures within the business are vital. We've taken away any sort of top-down reviews within the business. We now have peer-to-peer reviews, which we haven't actually started yet, but we've designed the process so each year you will have 2 peers that do your annual review for you, and you'll likewise do them back. And again, it requires training for everyone, because you're sort of putting everyone in a position where saying, yeah, you're doing great, when there is actually something to sort of pick up and try and improve, you're not doing anyone any favors, and it's going to lower the standards of the business. So helping everyone develop the ability to have those conversations, which aren't easy things. It's one of the mad things about promotion, isn't it? You promote the people that perform best within the business, and more often than not, they're not the right person for the promotion. They're a brilliant salesperson. It doesn't mean they're going to be a brilliant sales manager, and maybe they don't even want to be sales manager, but they would just like the money and maybe the kudos. So it's rethinking that whole sort of structural basis of a business, and ensuring that everyone gets to participate in areas of the business that they want to be involved in, that they get to upskill in a controlled way. So you don't just let people run wild with, I want to be involved in marketing and I'm going to be a marketeer now. There is, you learn to be a marketeer, like you learn to sell, travel, like you learn to do SEO. And so it's just piece by piece you need to start adding on to this. And I think it will be a journey, and I really love this fact. I think it will be a journey we'll be on forever. And that's what makes it so exciting, because John's eyes light up, my eyes light up. It's like, well, what can we do next? And you're not doing it for the gimmick, you're doing it because it's like, well, how far can we push the envelope in that direction that's going to still be in the benefit of the client, be to the benefit of the business, and be to the benefit of everyone within the business?
Yeah, I think the like the point on the training is a really important one, because again, like with the go off for a month kind of thing, it's like this thing is a difficult thing to do. Like it's not everyone is not set like wired in a way that it makes sense to them. Giving people the tools to work in that particular way is super important. And like I said, from my personal perspective, when I'm trying to pick these things up, it's like, oh God, I don't know what to do next. I don't know the answer to that question. Yep. And it's the same for all the members of the team. It's like, all right, okay, we're doing this new thing now where we're supposed to kind of peer-to-peer review thing. But if you haven't set them up with the skill set to go to, you know, almost like have a tough conversation or give negative feedback or whatever it might be, then you're almost just like chucking them out to sea.
Absolutely.
See how you get on.
And it's going to fall apart. So Lucy, who used to be the HR within the business, is now sales performance supervisor and trainer. I forget the exact title. Apologies, but and that's really important. It's to have someone within the business.
There are no titles, John.
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, we're gonna have to stop that. But we don't have HR in the way we used to have HR. It's a very, very different skill set required now to do what she's doing, and it's getting amongst people and being there to help people to sort of hold us together in a way. So she will work in lots of different areas of the business, same as all of us. So she's working on B Corp. We're under assessment for B Corp at the moment, and that's going really well. And that's changed a whole load of things structurally within the business. But she's also there to sort of help. She's there in place of John day to day, to be the glue that keeps us steering along. So one thing that she'll be doing from next month, for example, is she'll be dropping in on various project meetings that people are attending and so on, just to make sure that we keep the shape of the meeting, because that's really important. A little bit like the agile working process is, there are certain things you have to do in order for the process to work overall, and it's all about the openness of the communication. It's about sticking to standing items. It's about keeping things, you know, the clock running smoothly, so that, you know, what should be an hour meeting becomes 3 hours and eats into everyone's day, and now they don't really want to do that meeting so much anymore. So these little details are absolutely vital. But it's an amazing thing to say, but we are a vastly better communicated business than we ever were before, and we're all working remotely still. We're not in the same office, and we're an open plan office. Everyone spoke to each other the entire time. There were no closed doors. That was one of the policies that we had before. But everyone knows everything now, because, you know, we're using the technology correctly. We're using Slack rather than the silos that emails create, and everyone trusts everyone, that there are no secrets. And, you know, we had one channel which is a private channel, and it was around the time of having to make redundancies and so on. And obviously there was some very delicate stuff that needs to be talked about then, but we kept that redundancy process as open as we possibly could. You know, it was very, you know, we were very clear with the processes that we were using to make the selection, how we were going to be going about it, when we would be giving results and so on, and the considerations that were being taken. And, you know, the only thing that we had to have was, you know, financials bouncing around and things like that, and that's not something that would have been appropriate to be sharing openly with everyone. But what was important about that is we explained to everyone that that's why that channel was private, so there's no suspicion.
So from our perspective, I think like the two, because listen, there's loads of great things and examples you're talking about there. I keep thinking, like, how can we make to someone who's not familiar with it, how can we break it down into something that's very understandable, like day to day, as to what's happening? And I think for us, the like two big things that have changed have been Slack instead of email, and everything being open, and the other one being the like team meeting format that we do, where we have a like fortnightly meeting that is what you were touching on, sounded like the policy kind of thing, Nick, where I've got just John in my head now, just ringing. The policy idea of where, for us, it's like people just bring suggestions to that meeting, they propose them, the rest of the team listens to them, and everyone votes on whether they think it's a safe to try, is the phrase.
Safe to try, like, really important.
And those really, I think, in terms of the specific things that happen regularly, are really the two main things. Like, there's lots of random training that we've done, like I say, on listening better, and my own we've done like a feedback session for specifically focused on me, which I think you've also done, that we'll come on to. But I think those two things are really like the core changes that we've made that seem relatively small, but then they've had such a massive impact.
The way that the Slack empowers everybody within the business, all channels need to be open. You need to very, very carefully manage your notifications so that you're not being bleep, bleep, bleep throughout the day as everyone's posting anything about something that you might want to check in at another time. But you can look at it if you do choose to. But what it does is it allows small projects, so meetings to take place, and the regularity of those meetings are really important, but take place without everyone being involved, or certainly without what used to be the MD or the manager or the directors being involved. It's like those three people, they're taking care of our B Corp assessment. They will call me in when they need a signature on something, or when they would like some advice on an area that they feel I may have some greater experience with, or whatever it may be. And that's really important. I think that constant open communication, that takes time to get through to people and to sort of trust it. And I remember really clearly just one of my team, after about 6 months of working with John, there was still a suspicion in him, not in a negative way, but he just was like, what's the catch here? Is this, something's not quite right? Why is Nick letting this happen? And I can't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but I remember very close to Christmas, he just was a different person in a meeting, and he was leaning forward, and he was fully on board. And I just said, pennies dropped, isn't it? And he went, yeah. Got it. And he just took a little bit longer to get it. And different, I had people on day one were like, yeah, this is what we've been waiting for all our lives. And I was like, I didn't know about this. This is off my radar. And other people that sort of dripped in at various different times. I think one of the areas that we've started to find problems, because it isn't without its problems, and I think that's really important. We get very excited and animated when we talk about this stuff, because we're feeling the benefit of this empowerment across the business, and the space that it gives you, no doubt, and certainly I know the space that it gives me to focus in other areas of the business, as opposed to organising when you don't need to have someone organising a rota for a sales team to be answering the phone. They can just work it out themselves. It doesn't need governing. But one of the areas that we've sort of hit bumps with, I think there is and it's a confidence thing. Sometimes some of the decisions that people are asking others to make, or the conversations, they're being too democratic, and it's like, and it's this sort of sense of, well, we voted 7-6, so we'll go with that lot. Well, voting 7-6, no one's actually that happy, because you've probably modified it a little bit to get the 7 votes and stuff like that. What you need is just one person going, yeah, it's safe to try, and give it a go and trial it, but in its purest form, whatever that sort of decision may be, whatever it is you're shipping that day. And that's something that needs further modification, because otherwise you just become a little bit middle ground on everything in order to try and keep everyone happy, and that's not what this is about.
I think the makeup of the team is very important, and again, like, there's people who will love this way of working, and then there's people who will just be like, please just tell me what to do. This is not for me. Like, I want to have that manager that tells me what to do, and I just do it, and I go home and forget about it. And
there is nothing wrong with that.
And that's absolutely fine. That is absolutely fine. But I think, like, getting, this is where the momentum, I think, rolls over time, is when you've made this change, you are sort of parachuting people into it and almost like forcing them into it. And certainly from our point of view, we've been super fortunate. Like, everyone's really hopped on board with it and been fantastic. It sounds like they have from your side too. But then I guess you touched on earlier about the team and how the team's always been so bought in, like hiring people for this kind of thing as time goes on, and hopefully hiring, as we know, isn't necessarily always the right answer, but how have you got the right kind of people over the years, whether that's like pre what we're doing now, and then like if obviously it becomes an even more important thing when you've got this.
I'd love to say that we hired people for their values and their fit into the culture, and I think in part we did, but we were always looking at travel experience as well. I totally buy into this sort of a lot of, I've read in a few places recently this sort of point of you can teach everyone to all the skills. You just need people that fit into your culture. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think we've got lucky a little bit over the years. We've also had a very, very good process and led by someone